Hey everyone, I know this video is out a day late, but unfortunately I tried. I farmed so much Node Avalon and Starcross and all these other activities to try and get a crossbow and a scout rifle force memorializer with the new kinetic perks, and they just were not dropping for me yesterday. So fortunately, I got them to drop for me today. We did a little bit of testing about the new perks and stuff like that, and so today I'm going to go ahead and do a little review of all of the new Ash and Iron perks, legendary weapons, and of course the new exotic rocket pulse, which we talked about in the last video, but I'm gonna formally place it into the exotic weapon tier list during this one. So unlike some previous seasons where I made separate videos for, perks, origin, traits, and then of course the weapons were separate, this season I'm gonna do perks first and origin traits and the new weapons in the same video, and we're going to talk about the perks as the first topic because a lot of these new weapons have these new perks, and so it would be better for context for you guys to understand what I think of the new perks first and maybe understand what they do before we get into the thick of things. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with perks right off the rip. And we have quite a few new perks to talk about. I believe we have 6 of them to talk about. And one of them has actually made its way into the S tier, if you take a look right over here, and that's Aggregate Charge. And the way Aggregate Charge works is it's a sustained damage perk, so it's good for boss damage. And if you do damage to an elemental debuff target, so elemental debuffs include stuff like Suppress and Weaken and Jolt and Scorch, stuff like that, right? If you have 3 debuffs on a target, and you do damage, I believe even your first shot will receive a 30% buff for 3 seconds. So you can do that for 3 seconds. I think it's for a couple seconds, might not be exactly 3. There's not even a timer. It just kind of you just have this buff and it just refreshes itself. So as long as that target continues to have debuffs, you will continue to do 30% more damage. It's 10% per stack. Now, I know a lot of people were suggesting it was 10, 20, 40 on primaries, and that was 33 on heavies. This was a result of rounding being a problem on primaries, because obviously primaries these days do single-digit or double-digit numbers per bullet, and so it was becoming very hard to distinguish between a number like 13 and a number like 14 when it comes to 30% versus 40% on the buffs. We tested on Savathun and confirmed on every single weapon type, regardless of ammo, is going to be 10, 20, 30, I believe, if it's non-enhanced. And then if it is enhanced, you get a 10% increase to the damage of just the buff portion, which would increase it to 11, 22, 33, which is the number that a lot of you guys are seeing right now. I'm going to assume that the base value is 10, 20, 30, and that the enhancement does in fact increase the damage by about that much, because that is the same behavior that we're seeing on stuff like Reservoir Burst. Okay, so what does this mean for the perk economy? This is basically a bait and switch replacement that works on the first shot, in theory, from what I've heard at least. And it's great for fireteam settings. It's not as good for solo because keeping 3 debuffs on a target when you're solo is a little bit annoying. But in fireteams, Tractor applies both Suppress and Weaken, and then you just need a long-standing, debuff like Scorch, which can be applied using Hellion. You can have, Unravel, which infinitely reapplies itself. So plenty of debuffs that you can apply that are basically going to guarantee that your fire team has a 30+% sustained perk, which is excellent, better than bait and switch in theory. And even in practice, I think even for some scenarios where you don't necessarily have a lot of setup and you're working in a more restrictive environment, I still think Aggregate Charge is going to be an extremely consistent perk to use. And so that's why I place it in the S tier above bait and switch, which I didn't think would be dethroned in the next little while. We haven't really had any excellent perks come out from Bungie recently, and this is a nice change of pace. Super easy to use, and has definitely power crept a lot of the other perks below it, like Elemental Honing and stuff like Bait and Switch, especially given that Elemental Honing on non-kinetic weapons only goes up to 35%, which is really like spitting distance from 33%, right? So yeah, that's the first perk I want to talk about. Let's scroll down here a little bit and talk about Crystalline Corpsebloom, which I placed over here at rank 31 in the B tier. Now, Crystalline Corpsebloom is surprisingly decent. It's like Headstone, except for it doesn't have a crit requirement. The only requirement is that you get a kill initially. So I was pleasantly surprised by this perk. I thought it would be like 3 kills to get a crystal or something like that. It's actually much better than that. So you only need 1 kill. And after your first kill, you get a little buff called Crystalline Corpsebloom. And then every time you get an additional kill, it makes an additional crystal. Now, the only downside to this crystal is that its location is a lot less favorable compared to Headstone. So the crystal is maybe something you can use for cover, maybe something you can use to kind of proc Whisper of Shards. If there's adds nearby, maybe you can blow it up and do some splash damage. But I think it is a lot nicer than Headstone because Headstone is restricted to weapon types that are precision weapons, and there's a lot of weapons that are used for ad clear in today's economy that are, you know, not precision weapons. Like imagine if we got this on like a Stasis Area Denial or like a Stasis Rocket Sidearm or really anything like a Stasis Glaive even would probably appreciate a perk like this. So I'm really placing this in the B tier because I'm anticipating its presence on more favorable weapon archetypes when it comes to being used for ad clear or just being used as a utility perk in general. So if you're a Stasis user and you like using stuff like Whisper of Shards, I'm sure you're going to really appreciate this perk. But even regardless, I think it is a pretty solid perk and certainly a lot more viable in Headstone just because of its lack of precision requirement. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. The crystal it makes is also just like, you know, pretty decently sized off the rip. So, you know, pretty happy with that. Next up, we have Ancillary Ordinance. I believe Ancillary Ordinance is also in the B tier. I placed it right at the top of B tier. This is very much one of the reasons why a lot of the time when a new perk comes out, other people do testing and it's just a numbers game. And I kind of have a very easy time understanding a perk before I actually play with it. Now, some of these perks like Ancillary Ordinance and Bewildering Burst are kind of, you know, first of their kind. And so that's part of the reason why I really wanted to farm for these weapons to actually try the perks to get a feel for them. So Ancillary Ordinance, the way that this perk works is upon getting 3 elemental final blows, so it can be like ability kills or other weapon kills, or a single final blow on an elemental debuff target, you get a stack. And you can get up to 5 stacks. And what these stacks do is the weapon that has Ancillary Ordinance doesn't need to be in your hand when you're doing this. It can be stowed as well. When you get a kill, a kind of twisting, seeking firework missile comes out of the enemy that you killed, and it seeks over very aggressively to a nearby target and blows up on them, right? It blows up on them, and the splash is actually fairly substantial, I would say, and the damage is actually not too bad either. When I was using it on orange bars at, you know, over leveling by plus 100, it was close to one-shotting them. I think it did around maybe like 3 or 4 times the damage of like a normal shot from the scout rifle I was using. So definitely not too bad. And in terms of kinetic ad clear weapons, this is kind of nice for builds where you're killing a lot of elemental debuff stuff like Hellion comes to mind, for example, and you just want to use a primary every once in a while, or even I can see this being on special weapons too. I can see this being decent on like a kinetic rocket sidearm or something like that, where in the future, let's say you're using Hellion, right? If you use Hellion and everything that you are looking at is getting scorched all the time, then you're going to be proccing this literally every single time you kill something. And, you know, while the missile itself is not particularly amazing, the fact that its requirement, its trigger, is so easy to activate in the pocket, as well as when you're actually using the weapon, makes it a lot better in my opinion. So I think it can be up there with stuff like Incandescent in terms of usefulness. Obviously, it doesn't have any subclass synergies, but I think the ease with which you can activate it is pretty nice. I'm just kind of hesitant on putting it above the B tier for now. Definitely something that people are going to have to play with more, and when we see it appear on other weapon archetypes and weapon families, we'll definitely get a better sense of how good this perk is. Next up, we have Bewildering Burst, which I've gone ahead and I've placed into the C tier. A Bewildering Burst is a little bit interesting. So the way it works, it's kind of like Kill Clip, except instead of doing more damage on your next bullet after you reload, your next bullet makes a little kinetic blinding blast above the target. And it kind of reminds me of like a Bombardier's projectile, right? So like when you dodge with Bombardiers, it makes that little explosive that floats up and blows up. It's kind of like that, right? It's kind of like that. Unfortunately, the blinding blast from this kinetic explosive is a relatively small radius, and I'm not sure if there's anything you can do to increase its radius. And on top of that, it kind of floats above your targets and it doesn't really do much damage at all. And so it is a little bit awkward, but I will say I could see this being used on something like a kinetic SMG with like kinetic tremors, or with ancillary, which there is, spoiler alert, there is a kinetic SMG with both these perks. So I could see it being potentially useful. It's nice to have blinding on an ad clear weapon rather than having to use something like a blinding gel. So it's definitely not the same as a blinding gel because it has a requirement built into it, but it is definitely interesting and could potentially be useful on builds that don't have easy access to de-aggro and want a good pairing with a weapon that can consistently get a decent amount of kills even in more contest-like environments. So that's it for Bewildering Burst. Let's go ahead and talk about Lead from Light next. Lead from Light, I did some pixel measurement testing here. I'm not sure if it's additive, so it adds a certain amount to your ammo progress every time you get a kill after picking up an orb, or if it is a multiplicative scaler. If it is a multiplicative scaler, I think I got a number like 19 green pixels for 5 kills versus 25 green pixels for 5 kills with 5 stacks of Lead from Light. And so you can get up to 6 stacks, by the way. I'm not really sure what the enhancement does. It says it improves the perk like proc like frequency or something, which doesn't really make any sense. But regardless of what the enhancement does, I had the enhanced version on, and it seems like it's like around 25% extra special progress on kill, and it consumes a stack every time you get a kill. So this is not horrible, right? There's obviously builds that are capable of producing orbs through attrition orbs or heavy-handed and stuff like that, but special ammo progress, unlike lead from gold, which is just raw special ammo, isn't as highly valued of a stat in endgame right now. I could see someone putting this on something like an SMG or like a weapon that they're using to farm ammo between phases. Definitely not horrible, but it's not heavy ammo progress, right? It's not heavy ammo progress, it's special ammo progress. And a lot of the time, you know, you're topping yourself up with your teammate special finishers, with your own special finishers. They don't really need a perk like this, and you'd probably rather have like a splash perk or a better utility perk. So definitely interesting, but I think it's definitely in the same category as like Impromptu and Sharp Harvest, two of the other newer perks that we have that interact with the new ammo system in different ways. And I think those perks are also a little bit untested now as well. So we're gonna have to see how those play out, but definitely not super strong. I don't foresee the ceiling for this perk being particularly high. So yeah, that's it for Lead from Light. And finally, the last perk that I want to talk about is in the D tier, and that's going to be Collective Pugilism. Now, Collective Pugilism, I've actually used this perk on a variety of weapons. I tried it on Drang, I tried it on MIDA, and I also tried it on the new Rocket, and it's okay, right? It's fine on primaries. It does a decent amount. I think on the SMG, it was definitely the weakest. I would say on the sidearm, it was definitely decent. It was giving me some decent melee chunks, but melee chunks or not, right? Melee charges are not necessarily super valuable in today's sandbox because a lot of the best melee builds, whether we're talking Throwing Hammer, whether we're talking something like Combination Blow, they refund themselves, right? They're good because they're spammable. And so you don't really need melee charges. The places where I could see this being useful are like maybe Fleshit Storm, I guess, or like getting your Thunderclap back or something like that. But even in those situations, the main problem with this perk is its requirement. Its trigger is a subclass pickup. And so on Solar, I don't know, you can make fire sprites using Searing, but it's not super common, I suppose. It's like fine. And on the one subclass, I think that really consistently makes fire sprites, which is, you know, Solar Titan, even then it's like, it's not necessarily like super important that you have fire sprites for this because you have your melee all the time anyway. And then, you know, on Arc, you have Ionic Traces. Maybe you could play into that with Thunderclap and stuff. I don't know. It's just a bit weird, right? It's just subclass pickup. The effect is decent. On the Rocket with Pack Hunter, by the way, it instantly gives you back your melee, like super fast. Obviously, I had Bray Legacy as well, but, you know, even without Bray Legacy, I can definitely see Collective Pugilism giving your melees back crazy fast. But, like, when is that really particularly useful, right? So it's like you're going to pick up a subclass item, you're going to use Collective Pugilism instead of like a reload or a damage perk, and then you're going to what, like spam melees? Like, I don't know. It's a bit interesting. The effect is definitely decent. It's just not really a needed effect, I suppose. And the trigger for picking up, you know, a subclass pickup in order to activate the perk, not that great. It's kind of situational and not the best, right? Definitely build dependent. And also kind of weapon archetype dependent as well, depending on how you want to use the actual perk. Okay, so that's it for perks. Let's go ahead and talk about Contending Cascade next, which is an origin trait. Now, the interesting thing about Contending Cascade is there's two halves to its effect, right? So let's go ahead and read here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you guys can see a little bit better. So the trigger for this origin trait is Rapid Final Blows. And the way that it works is as soon as you get a kill, at least to my knowledge, as soon as you get a kill, a timer starts. And until that timer ends, you want to get as many kills as you can. And every time you get a new kill, a new timer starts. And basically, it's like how fast of a rapid kill streak, how many kills can you get in a short amount of time, right? And this buff lasts forever, and your stacks never go down. So if you get like 14 kills in a row in like 3 seconds, and then you wait for a really long time, and then you start getting kills again, the number will never drop below 14 as long as you still are alive, I suppose, right? And when you die, you do lose your stacks. And so having basically a passive handling and reload buff for an entire activity's duration, as long as you're getting some level of killing spree, is definitely decent, right? And it's easier to stack than something like Field Tested. It's definitely more realistic, I would guess, to stack than Field Tested, especially on weapon types that are not like waveframes and stuff like that. So it's better in that regard, and so I placed it over Field Tested for that reason. However, there is another effect, which is when you get a 15 kill streak, and then you get a subsequent kill after that, so any kill after that, it upgrades, the buff in your hotbar, it upgrades to Crowned Cascade, right? To Crowned Cascade. And when you get a kill, it does an elemental damage explosion, as it says. However, the explosion is very small, at least on the crossbow, which is the only weapon that has it right now. It is very small, and it does very little damage. So it's more of a quirk and less of a actual useful thing. And honestly, the kill streak requirement is quite difficult to hit, I'm not gonna lie, especially on the crossbow. I had to like group up a bunch of scions in the shooting range and blow them up using explosive bolts in order to actually meet this kill streak requirement. And definitely on other weapon types that are not as good as, you know, at ad clearing, they're not heavy weapons, or even some of the weapons like waveframes and rocket sidearms that I can see getting a lot of these kills, I still don't think you're getting 15 in the time that you need in order to upgrade this thing to Crown Cascade. So you can essentially ignore the second part of this origin trait, unless I'm wrong about the way that it activates. But, you know, I played with it a little bit, you know, 5 minutes or so in the shooting range, and that was about as much as I could get out of it. So I really don't think Contending Cascade, you can kind of ignore the second part of the origin trait. Sure, it's technically a positive bonus, but you're almost never going to be activating it, and the payoff is really not that great. And so in my opinion, it's basically mostly a reload, mostly a handling buff that you can get per stack. And so that's why I've decided to place it in the B tier, compared to the A tier, where you definitely see some splash options, as well as the S tier, where you see some really, really solid splash options, like Cursed Thrall. That's all I wanted to say for perks and origin traits. Let's get into the meat of things, probably what most of you are here for, and that's going to be legendary weapons. So starting us off, we have a shotgun, a reprise shotgun, Arcane Embrace, which is going to be coming out in Festival of the Lost. Also, something I do want to say is, if you guys don't like spoilers, because I know some of you have mentioned this in the past in the comments, if you don't like spoilers, we are going to be talking about some weapons that are going to be coming out from the Epic Raid that have been kind of shown in the API. They're not leaks or anything, but they're in the API. So if you want that to be like a surprise about these weapons, you know, cover your eyes, I suppose. But we are going to be covering some of those weapons that are not actually in the game yet. So first up, we have Arcane Embrace, which is again from Festival of the Lost coming up. And I actually have not moved it. I moved it higher in the B tier, but I haven't moved it anywhere from the B tier. It was in the B tier in Edge of Fate, and now in Ashen Iron, it's still in the B tier. It's higher up. I would say the main improvement here is it got Aggregate Charge, which is the perk that we talked about before, and it's a much more consistent perk. So you basically have a guaranteed 30% perk, and you have 4 times a charm, which makes this a pretty high total damage weapon, a pretty reliable weapon, certainly a better perk than Precision Instrument. However, it is still a bit niche. I do think heavy bursts are still relatively niche, and I still do think that Envious Arsenal and the access to Withering Gaze on a short-range hitscan weapon on Pure Recollection gives it a higher amount of utility over a weapon like Arcane Embrace, which is why there's still a degree of separation between them. So yeah, that's it for Arcane Embrace. I don't think it's a particularly controversial opinion, given that the perk pool almost didn't change, but it's, you know, it was only a couple seasons ago that we got our last version of Arcane Embrace. So let's go ahead and move on to the Fusion Rifle tier list, where we're going to be talking about Burden of Guilt. Now, Burden of Guilt used to be in the D tier. This is quite an old weapon. It was not even enhanceable. But for those of you that don't know why Burden of Guilt might be noteworthy, it is the Adaptive Frame of Fusion, which is the fastest charge rate fusion archetype that can still 2-shot stun, or not stun, I should say, two-shot freeze using Chill Clip. And so that's kind of notable, I suppose. And it is enhanceable now. And so what did they give it? They gave it Envious Arsenal in the first column, which is okay. It's no rewind rounds, it's no recon. They give it Rhyme Stealer as well, which is, again, okay. And then in the right column, we got Chill Clip, which it already had. It has Controlled Burst, and it has Aggregate Charge. So overall, I would say pretty decent. However, Origin Trait, pretty bad. Fleet-Footed does almost nothing when it comes to PvE. And then if we look at the S tier and we look at Lionfish, you can see Reconstruction and Lead from Gold, which are both better than anything Burden of Guilt has in the first column. And then you have Chill Clip combined with Controlled Burst and Elemental Honing. So yeah, Lionfish is definitely quite a bit better. It's obviously better Origin Trait as well, better frame as well. You could argue that Aggregate Charge kind of maybe gives Burden of Guilt an argument, you know, some contention when it comes to Lionfish, but Lionfish is definitely the better fusion rifle overall, and so Burden of Guilt is going to remain in the B tier. Definitely has a much worse first column as well. Next up in the auto rifle section, we have a auto rifle from the new Epic Raid. It's going to be called Cusp Sempiternal, and it's a Void Support auto rifle. Now, the interesting thing about Void Support auto rifles that I can't actually even show you in this tier list because we don't have a section for it, but Void Support auto rifles give your teammates Void Overshield, and Void Overshield is one of the strongest defensive buffs in the game. It has 70% DR for the Overshield that you have, which is pretty excellent. And on top of this, Frame of Reference is a decent origin trait, just a great neutral origin trait. And then if we look at this perk pool, it is absolutely excellent, right? I wasn't even able to fit all of the perks that I wanted to suggest onto this area because I can only fit 3 in each column, but it has stuff like Impulse Amplifier too, which could be potentially interesting, could make the auto rifle feel a lot more snappy when it comes to healing your teammates, as well as just killing ads in general. But what it does have, I will say, Reciprocity, Destabilizing Rounds, Repulsor Brace, Withering Gaze, which is interesting. Not a fan of this, especially on slower moving projectile weapons, but it's definitely an option. I mean, Destabilizing Rounds alone makes this thing a valuable, ad clear option, even ignoring its support auto kind of tendencies and its utility. You have Repulsor Brace as well. You have Attrition Orbs in the first column instead of in the second column, like No Hesitation has. So while I don't know whether Cusp Sempiternal will feel more OP than No Hesitation, Physic is still such a crazy strong perk. I think Cusp Sempiternal will definitely make an argument, and it's definitely stronger than Adamantite, that is for sure. And so I'm going to go ahead and put it in the S tier. Not going to put it above No Hesitation for now. I think it's going to be better for your teammates and worse for you, but we're definitely going to have to see what ends up happening when people actually start to use this thing. I'm just happy we're getting another support auto and one from the Epic raid as well, so we can get some nice shiny tier 5s with some cool aesthetics. Excited to farm for that when that comes out. Okay, next up we have a sidearm. We're going alphabetically today, by the way, and it's going to be Drang. Drang, Together Forever, that's the adaptive frame of sidearm, which is basically similar to a lightweight. It's a little bit better when it comes to damage profile, maybe a little bit worse feeling, but that's kind of subjective. Ammogen stat is a step above Heliocentric, which is its main competitor. You have other perks like Loose Change, which Heliocentric doesn't really have access to in the first column. You have Collective Pugilism, which I think is okay on this sidearm depending on your build. You have Incandescent, Burning Ambition, Master of Arms, and Vanguard Determination, which is a better origin trait despite not being amazing than Nadir Focus. So definitely a step above Heliocentric. I do think Insurmountable's combination of Repulsor Destabilizing, which I think is better than the Solar perks, as well as Dark Aether Reaper, is still pretty solid. Definitely, it's kind of take it or leave it. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to prefer Drang in the end because precision sidearms are definitely a bit weird feeling. But, both pretty good sidearms. Drang in the S tier. Pretty solid stuff. Better Heliocentric and better origin trait, better perk diversity like I've written in the notes. Okay, so that's it for Drang. Let's go ahead and move to our auto rifle tier list for our next alphabetical weapon. Back to the auto rifle tier list, actually. And we're going to be talking about Everburning Glitz. This is the new Trials auto rifle. It's a rapid fire auto rifle. And remember how I was saying that I wish that the auto rifle from Kepler, Giver's Blessing, I wish that had attrition and kinetic? Well, now we have a kinetic auto rifle that's a rapid that has attrition and kinetic. So this thing is pretty solid. It has Bewildering Burst and Ancillary Ordinance as well, which I think is an interesting combination worth trying out, even though it has potentially less utility than something like Attrition Kinetic for making orbs. I will say though, maybe you can try Bewildering Kinetic, because Attrition Orbs, like my friend Spider has pointed out, is definitely slower to proc on an auto rifle than an SMG, but I will say Kinetic Tremors is a bit underrated, I think, on rapid fire autos. It has a pretty decent scaler. It activates almost as quickly as an SMG like Multimach, which might surprise some of you, but the RPM of a rapid fire auto is fairly high, and it activates in like under a second or something like that when enhanced. So the perks, like I say, do need playtime. I think people do need to try Bewildering and Ancillary to get a feel of how good they are in endgame. Lord knows that, the time that I spent using Bewildering and Ancillary in the firing range was not enough to get a full, real, in-depth understanding of the perks and how good they will be in endgame. So I'm excited for people to try them out. I will say Bewildering, it is a little bit underwhelming with its blinding blast radius, but I will say, it is potentially useful, especially if you don't necessarily need the orbs as much. But the general package, like I mentioned in the notes here, looks pretty good. The only thing disappointing about this auto rifle, by the way, is really just the origin trait. Like Fleet-footed is pretty bad. It's not very good. But, the rest of the package looks pretty good. Okay, let's go ahead and move to Finite Impactor, which is going to be a hand cannon. Now, this hand cannon used to be arc, if I'm not mistaken. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But it's solar. It's solar now. And we've moved it from the F tier, the bottom tier, into the D tier. So not much of a glow up. The main problem with this solar 140 hand cannon is that, number one, if you look in the first column, it has heal clip and enlightened action, which are okay. But heal clip on hand cannons, especially on 140s, kind of slow loaders, heal clip, the reason why that perk is good is because on weapons like sidearms, you can get almost an instant reload and get that instant gratification, that instant snap-on healing effect that you can use to heal yourself in a dangerous situation. But the longer you take to reload, the longer that sequence of events is that gets you that healing that you might need. And so on hand cannons, heal clip is definitely not as good feeling for sure. And on top of this, you have Burning Ambition, which is really not that good of a perk in my opinion for neutral play. And then you have Precision Instrument, which is just like, again, not a particularly great perk for neutral play either. Skulking Wolf is a decent origin trait, but yeah, overall, this thing is definitely lacking. If it had something like Incandescent, it could definitely move up a tier or two, but you know, it's just really lacking in the splash perk department. And in its first column is not particularly amazing either. I think the meta for hand cannons is largely double splash or you know, damage / utility plus splash, and I think that's kind of been the playbook. And I don't think this weapon is going to break the mold in any way. Okay, next up we have a rocket launcher. We have 2 rocket launchers this season. We're going to be covering one of them first, and it's going to be Folded Root. Folded Root, it's an aggressive void rocket, and its claim to fame, I suppose, is having Cluster Bomb in the first column. Now, I believe Bungie did this because they obviously buffed Enhanced Cluster Bomb recently, and while Cluster Bomb is pretty decent, the rest of this thing's, you know, perks in the second column are not that good. This thing basically is the spiritual successor to Braytech Osprey, which was another void rocket with Cluster Bomb in the first column and stuff like Bipod in the second column. So if you ever need a rocket for a GM and you're still using Galleon rockets for some reason, which nobody really does anymore because everyone likes being on a sword, you can use this, I guess. I mean, it has air trigger too. But the main things with this are, you know, it has cluster, it has like add clear perks, it has lasting, they give it destabilizing rounds for some reason, which I think a rocket really doesn't benefit that much from. But yeah, there's that. It has tenacity, which is pretty decent for, again, like roaming ad clear. So it does make sense that it's for like, you know, ad clear purposes. But really, unfortunately, I wish they kind of swapped the frames. I wish they gave Haliaetus, you know, aggressive, and they gave this rocket high impact, as high impact would suit this rocket better, being the best ad clear frame given the higher reserves and the lower damage per shot. But, you know, can't have everything, right? So yeah, that's it for Folded Root. A bit of a missed opportunity with this one, but we're going to move on to the Scout Rifle tab, where we will talk about Forced Memorializer, which is the scout rifle that was haunting me with not dropping with the correct perks. I had Bewildering Burst, like 3 of them, and I just didn't get Ancillary Ordinance for like a full day of farming. But I finally have one, and it feels okay. You know, it's a 180 RPM scout rifle, so it's never going to feel as good as like a rapid or a lightweight, which is unfortunate. But its actual stat package and, you know, its overall just feel and its perks and stuff like that, it's probably better than Hung Jury, I would say overall. It actually does have Shoot Salute, by the way. I just didn't include it here because there's no explosive payload pairing. And so I think the other perks are a little bit more viable when it comes to endgame content. There's definitely a couple weapons this patch that I definitely wanted to include 4 recommended perks on. But, you know, no space. It's fine. I don't think people are really like picking up this scout rifle specifically for Shoot Salute or anything like that. There's definitely better options. But yeah, Force Memorializer, it has Bewildering Burst, Ancillary Ordinance, interesting perk combo. I think really like it being A tier is more of a sign of just scout rifles in general are kind of falling behind other primary types, and you know, they're just not particularly amazing. I don't think this weapon is one that you should farm, in my opinion, despite it being in the A tier. And so yeah, that's kind of, I guess, indicative of where scout rifles are in the current meta. But yeah, I think it has interesting kinetic perks, and even ignoring the new kinetic perks, explosive payload kinetic tremors, rapid hit kinetic tremors, certainly not horrible. Certainly not horrible. It wouldn't warrant being at the top of A if it didn't have the new perks, but it has the new perks, and I think they're pretty decent. So A tier it is. Let's go ahead and move on to the SMG tab. The SMG tab, we're going to take a look at Gunburn. So Gunburn is a new event SMG. This one has some of the new perks. It has Bewildering Burst, Kinetic Tremors, Ancillary Ordinance. Unfortunately, Attrition Orbs in the second column, which means you're probably not going to take it. But it does have, you know, Lead from Light, like I mentioned, which could be useful for generating special. I think the best combo, though, is going to be the perks that I put at the top. So Bewildering Burst and Kinetic Tremors, or you could do Bewildering Burst and Ancillary Ordinance. Vice Stinger is not bad either. 900 RPM, best frame. Yeah, not a multi-mock, I will say, which is kind of a high bar to clear these days, because multi-mock, there's not really much you could improve about it besides give it like a crazy OP origin trait. So I don't know. I think it is worse than multi-mock overall. Maybe I will grow to eat my words and people will find that the Blinding Blast from Bewildering Burst is more useful than Attrition Orbs, but I highly doubt it. But we'll see what happens, right? Gunburn, pretty decent, not too bad. Top of A tier, leaving it there for now. Next up, we have the rocket, the next rocket, Haliaetus, which I mentioned earlier. This rocket's been receiving a lot of hype, right? Because Bray Legacy seems to have some pretty good synergy with it. It has some decent perks. Now, the main issue with this rocket is that it is a high impact. It is a high impact, which means you're losing damage for free against a weapon like the When and Where, which also came out this season. The When and Where has similar damage perks. I guess it's missing Aggregate Charge, which is potentially, you know, a deal breaker here. But it has stuff like Frame of Reference, and it's a better frame, right? So I don't know, it's a bit difficult. And then Haliaetus is also missing stuff like Envious Arsenal, doesn't have Clown, doesn't have Reconstruction, stuff like that. So definitely some compromises being made when it comes to both of these rockets. But Haliaetus, you know, it's pretty decent. You know, Cluster Bomb, if you're going to use Cluster Bomb on a rocket, it's one of the best, right? I mean, Hezen Vengeance is obviously the best Cluster Bomb rocket, but doesn't have access to new gear bonuses and stuff like that. So yeah, Haliaetus, I think it's pretty decent. I don't think it's in the same tier as the When and Where and Hezen Vengeance, especially when we're not considering, you know, certain artifact mods or certain temporary seasonal mods and stuff like that. And so I'm going to go ahead and leave it in the A tier. I know a lot of people are kind of looking at new damage rotations that abuse Ray Legacy to spam abilities and stuff like that. Personally, generally speaking, in the past, when weapons have been used to facilitate ability regen and compromise when it comes to the actual weapon damage, it has been not as good, right? Because a lot of the time, for example, people, I think, overhyped Starfire a lot, or they're currently overhyping, I would say, Young Amakara's Spine a lot. And these rotations, I think people are very drawn to them because they feel very high APM. It feels like you're throwing a lot of stuff at the boss, but the actual damage of the stuff that you're throwing at the boss is not very high. And so when I see rotations that are, you know, spamming abilities using Bray Legacy and stuff like that, I have to kind of pull them into question when it comes to actual DPS, because, you know, I need to do some testing first. That's all, right? I need to do some testing. I'm just a little skeptical because in the past, definitely, you know, high APM rotations that involve ability spam of mediocre abilities, let's say, are generally not, you know, the best when it comes to damage. So we'll definitely assess them and analyze them, and I'll definitely try out the Haliaetus rotation that some of you guys have been sending me, and we'll take a look at it. We'll take a look at it, see how it goes. But for now, just on paper, this thing should be in the A tier and not hanging with the big dogs, not just yet. Okay, next up we have Hushed Whisper. Hushed Whisper is a bow. Interestingly enough, we had another Whisper bow not that long ago, which was Vengeful Whisper in the C tier, another Strand Precision bow. I suppose this one is its bigger brother. And so Hushed Whisper is going to be our first Strand bow with Tear on it, actually. And I think Tear on weapons that you are explicitly trying to take your time and aim and get precision kills with is pretty decent, right? A lot of the time, you know, Tear might be not as good on something like an SMG where you're not really getting crit kills all the time because of the recoil and the high RPM. But, you know, Hushed Whisper, I think, is a good weapon, a good primary example to have Tear on. It also has a wild card, which is a fairly decent splash origin trait. Well, splash to some degree. It has buffed Hatchling, it has Archer's Gambit, it has Slice, it has Lead from Light. There's a lot of interesting perks on this weapon. The only thing holding it back, really, is it's got a slightly lower than normal, I guess, ammo generation stat. And on top of that, compared to the primaries in the A and the S tier, the Strand perks are simply not as explosive and as high impact compared to something like a Destabilizing Rounds or a Kinetic Tremors or a Volt Shot on a bow, right? So when you're comparing it to stuff like that, I don't think Hushed Whisper really holds up as strongly, but it's certainly the best Strand bow by a country mile that we have available to us. Not that we have a lot of those, but, you know, I thought I'd say that at least to give it some credit. Next up, we have MIDA Macro-Tool, which is actually a shotgun. And it has the same model as a Wastelander, but it has the RPM of a precision frame, if I'm not mistaken, while Wastelander is a lightweight, so a little interesting there, I suppose. MIDA Macro-Tool is unfortunately not very good. It's in the B tier. It's got Grave Robber 1-2 Punch as a precision, which basically lines it up solidly with something like Compass Rose or Prophet of Doom or Deadlock. They're all basically the same shotgun. They're Grave 1-2 Punch shotguns. Some of them have access to Trench Barrel, some of them don't. That's going to kind of determine their placement in the B tier, but in terms of just where they are tier-wise, they're just in the B tier with all the other okay 1-2 punch shotguns that are not like doing anything crazy or special. And so MIDA Macro-Tool, I'm just going to put in the B tier, you know, just mediocre archetype, but still kind of relevant perks because of 1-2 punch and Trench Barrel. So yeah, just kind of puts it in the B tier. Nothing really special about this weapon. Let's go ahead and move on once more to MIDA Mini-Tool, a little throwback here that's been brought back from the dead for Season 27. And it's got some pretty decent perks, right? It has Heal Clip, Attrition Orbs, Loose Change in the first column, Incandescent, Burning Ambition, and Collective Pugilism in the second column. Now, really, we're going to be looking at stuff like Heal Clip, Incand, Attrition, Incand, Loose Change, Incand. Pretty solid, just general play SMG, right? Pretty solid. It's got Vanguard Determination, which is a pretty decent origin trait. But this thing got released basically at the same time as Yeartide Apex. They are almost identical SMGs, except Yeartide Apex has, I would say, a better second column when it comes to Chaos Reshaped. The origin trait is probably more noticeable in endgame content when it comes to using text balance stock to reload your SMG faster for stuff like PKs. And the first column is pretty similar as well. So I'm just going to place it slightly below Yeartide. It's definitely not worse by a significant margin or anything like that. I'm not going to place it in the A tier, but it's definitely not better than Yeartide. It's pretty similar. So we're just going to place it in the S tier. second like 900 RPM SMG that's like pretty similar to your tide. So just gonna leave it there. And we are gonna move on to Romantic Death, which is a breach GL. It's a waveframe, in fact. And Romantic Death, a bit of a shame here, because if you look at its column 1 and column 2, we have Repulsor Brace and Destabilizing Rounds and Chain Reaction and Surrounded as well, which are all interesting perks, but unfortunately this is a waveframe and not an area denial. Had this thing been an area denial with Chain Reaction, I definitely would have placed it in the S tier. Unfortunately, it is not an area denial. It is a waveframe. It is the first Repulsor Destabilizing waveframe, which I think in and of itself is not a bad thing. You know, it's technically not bad. I think Tenacity is also a great origin trait to have on an ad clear weapon like a waveframe. And so I've gone ahead. It's definitely the best waveframe in the game, in my opinion. It is better than something like Martyr's Retribution. I placed it in the A tier, but besides that, there's not much to say about it. I don't think necessarily it needs to be farmed or anything like that. I think Repulsor Destabilizing Baton is better, has more utility as well. So yeah, Romantic Death, I mean, it's nice, but you know, if you have a Baton that's good, I don't really think there's any reason why you should go for Romantic Death over that in particular. Okay, so next up we have Seraphine Haze. Seraphine Haze, I believe, is one of the only weapons, if not the only weapon right now, that has this new perk called Crystalline Corpsebloom. And so it is the weapon that I actually tested this new perk on. Was surprisingly, pleasantly surprised by Crystalline Corpsebloom. Makes crystals very, very quickly, once every kill. Very, very straightforward. Rhyme Stealer would probably be pretty decent on this thing because you are making so many crystals. And so, yeah, pretty chill perk, not too bad. However, you know, it is a stasis SMG. It is an aggressive. It doesn't necessarily have the best stats. I mean, if you look at SMGs, by the way, the ammo generation stat fluctuates like crazy. Like, there are some weapon families where you have a spread of like 20 from the worst ammo generator to the best ammo generator. SMGs, you've got 21 versus 70 ammo gen. That is a huge spread. And unfortunately, Seraphine Haze is kind of on the lower end of that spread, right? On top of that, not the best archetype, like I mentioned. And the traits, the origin trait, you know, the perks, they're decent, but they're nothing crazy. They're not anywhere near as good as like an Antedate, or like a No Survivors, or like an Imminence, or like anything in the S tier, right? So I think B tier is a fair placement for it. Certainly the best stasis SMG. You know, I've placed it 2 tiers above every other stasis SMG on this list. So shout out to Seraphine Haze. I think Crystalline Corpsebloom, like I said, with Rhyme Stealer, pretty good pairing. But it's not amazing. You know, it's not amazing. So I've gone ahead and placed it in the B tier. And let's go ahead and move on to Starscape Null. Starscape Null is a new shotgun. It's a lightweight shotgun from the Epic Raid. And Starscape Null is an interesting one because with raid weapons, Bungie likes to pack raid weapons full of great perks. But unfortunately, Starscape Null it's a lightweight. It's a lightweight shotgun. Lightweight shotguns have pretty low total shot count, and they're not really used for anything in the sandbox. They're like the high quality of life archetype, which is like not that valuable. Like Rapids, their claim to fame is raw DPS, and they're also high shot count, so they're good for 1-2 punch for roaming. Aggressives are high damage per shot. Slugs are for crit related stuff. You know, every shotgun archetype minus a couple have their own niche, right? And lightweights, it's kind of hard to see what their niche is, especially when Bungie has packed this thing full with sustained damage perks. This thing has like aggregate charge. It has reconstruction and rewind. It's like they want this thing to be a damage dealer, but it's a lightweight, and I'm not really sure why you would use this for damage. It's just like an odd perk pool, right? It also has like some ammo generator perks. It has like recon and rewind. And then it has perks that are like kind of short-term bursts or like 1-2 punch and trench barrel. I don't know. It's just like a weird perk pool. And unfortunately, being a lightweight shotgun kind of just makes it dead in the water compared to some of the other shotguns that we're most likely going to receive, as well as the ones that we already have received. So an interesting shotgun, you know, I'll probably get one just because it's new gear. But besides that, it's not particularly amazing. Just going to place it at the top of B tier. It's certainly got more bells and whistles than the other like generic 1-2 punch shotguns like Prophet of Doom and Deicide and stuff like that. But that's not enough to put it in the A tier, where there's stuff with double damage perks or, you know, Withering Gaze access or like, you know, Cascade Point. Stuff like that is really what sets you apart from the rest of the pack in the B tier. And I don't think Starscape Null, despite having a really cool name, I don't think it has any of that. Okay, next up we have Submersion. Submersion is going to go in the other tab because we only have 2 crossbows and it's not very easy for me to rank them against each other, I suppose, at this time. Submersion I think is pretty cool though. It does have chill clip access, it has headstone access, it has lead from light access. I think autoloading on a crossbow is pretty decent, right? Could be useful for some endgame content, maybe, if you're using this crossbow just, you know, for fun, running around as like a roam option. Headstone on a crossbow, definitely like, you know, not horrible as well. Definitely one of the highest like crit damage weapons in terms of just raw burst. So I don't know, just an interesting weapon, I suppose. I don't think it's necessarily going to be used for DPS like that much, maybe. I mean, I guess Aggregate Charge is a lot easier to use than Honing. You lose out on frame of reference, but were you even using frame of reference on the crossbow when it comes to boss DPS? Nah, not really. So I think going forward for boss DPS, I'll probably try to get like an Aggregate Charge Submersion, like Bolt Scavenger Aggregate Charge. That's probably going to be better overall than Opaque Hourglass, just because Honing is just so much more annoying to proc than something like Aggregate Charge. So yeah, maybe Submersion will be decent, but yeah, it's more so dependent on whether or not crossbows end up being good in my testing after this video. So we'll see what happens. But you know, in terms of just being a crossbow, it's just a crossbow. It's nothing crazy special. You know, they threw like Chill Clip and Headstone on it because, you know, interesting stasis perks. But in terms of like the raw identity of a crossbow, it doesn't really change that much, I think. I do think, by the way, that the like explosive bolts and maybe some of the other bolt options blow up the headstone, which is pretty cool. I think Contending Cascade also blows up the headstone, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that's pretty interesting, I suppose. But yeah, that's all I have to say for Submersion. Not really much to say about that. Let's go ahead and move on to the Ever Present, which is actually a heavy gel. Now, we got another heavy gel this season, Outrageous Fortune, and the Ever Present is essentially the exact same thing. It's Envious Arsenal in the first column, and then Aggregate Charge, Bait and Switch, Elemental Honing in the second column. Aggregate Charge is obviously going to be better on a heavy gel compared to Bait and Switch. You get first shot access to a, you know, damage perk, and then Frame of Reference is, of course, better than Problem Solver when it comes to DPS. And so, despite the fact that it lacks Cascade Point in the first column, like VS Chill Inhibitor, which gives it a little bit less utility when it comes to raw burst DPS, it is still pretty good, right? It's still one of the best heavy gels in the game, and so I'm just going to go ahead and place it in the S tier. If Outrageous Fortune is in the S tier, this thing definitely is as well. Next up, we have Unfall. This thing, I do think it is the worst rocket item in the game. It's basically like Indebted Kindness, except I do think Volt Shot is better than Jolting Feedback. Even when you're amplified, if I'm not mistaken, Jolting Feedback only jolts on your third shot. And so, not amazing. It has Enhanced Lead from Gold, which is certainly welcome over non-enhanced on Indebted Kindness. Enhanced Lead from Gold is actually a pretty important perk to enhance. But the other perks and the origin trait are nothing crazy, and I do think Volt Shot really fits the identity of a rocket item very well, being able to 1 or 2 shot ads and then immediately be able to jolt and then reload and then jolt again and then reload. And I don't know, I just think it fits the identity of a rocket item really well. Whereas Jolting Feedback, you know, maybe not so much, right? So, I mean, still in the A tier, it's not that different from Indebted Kindness. I just, you know, I do think it is the worst rocket item in the game. I think all the other rocket items in the game have pretty, you know, well designated niches that they fill. Whereas Unfall is kind of just there, you know, it's like fine, you know, it's just there. So yeah, that's it for Unfall. I believe that is our last legendary weapon that came out with Ash and Iron. So real quick, I'm going to cover an exotic weapon change, and then, you know, I'll set you guys free. I'm imprisoning you here and forcing you to listen to me. Okay, so we have 2 or 3, I guess, exotic changes that I want to talk about. So the first one is going to be Outbreak Perfected. So Outbreak Perfected, for those of you that don't know, its super generation on hit was nerfed a lot. And so I think that's enough to tank it down from B tier down to the C tier. I might move it down a bit further than that in future seasons, but yeah, I'm going to leave it down here for now. Oh, I also do want to make a point to change the day 1 thing to situational. It's definitely not optimal anymore. That is for sure. And I'll leave the DPS as an exclamation mark as well. So yeah, that's it for Outbreak. And then we have 2 new exotics that are coming out with this update. The first one is going to be new Malpais. This is basically an exotic mint that has a bit higher DPS at base, much better total damage, and has some utility when it comes to unraveling things and providing like a debuff that you might want when you don't have like an Arcane Needle user available in your fire team. So yeah, I mean, new Malpais, pretty decent. Solid damage profile overall, and it has enough total damage as a special that I can see people even using it in something like a day 1. So it's not horrible. Yeah, it's just pretty decent, solid, kind of like the definition of a B tier exotic. And then we have Wolfsbane. Wolfsbane is a new sword-ish. It's like an axe that can't block, and it has sword functionality. It kind of sounds like Lament, right? It's like when you do damage, you get some healing, and, you know, you do mostly lead attack damage because, you know, it gives you bonus damage. And then once you charge the heavy attack, you can make this like Pyrogale Cyclone on the ground. I will say I don't have necessarily high hopes for this exotic, but it's really a numbers game. With an exotic like this, which seems to be mostly for damage, it's really a numbers game. And if Bungie release it overtuned, which a lot of the time with damage exotics, they tend to, you know, squish the dial a little bit to the right a little bit too much. Maybe we'll see. Maybe it'll be good. Maybe it won't be good. Who knows? But yeah, when it comes out, we'll definitely do some DPS testing on it, and I'll make a video about it. But for now, we're going to put some question marks because it's really a numbers game, right? I doubt it's going to be F tier or E tier, but I don't know if it's going to be A tier or B tier or not, okay? So we'll see when it comes out. That's it for now. I love all of you guys. I believe the next video that we're going to make is an archetype tier list update, because some of you are probably wondering if the rapid fire slug didn't have bugged assault mag, which we assume it does because it's plus 50 RPM instead of plus 5 like most assault mag options are. Is it going to be any good? The answer is probably no, but we're going to look at my new primary and special and heavy weapon DPS numbers at base with some precise calculations using our new friend Seraphine, which I'll talk about in that video. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.